So Motorola is clearly determined to not let me actually get any bloody sleep in March, seeing as how they've just released 4 new Moto G series smartphones here in the UK. And the most expensive of the bunch is this wee bleeder right here, the Moto G73. It's a 6.5-inch smartphone with a 120Hz IPS display, a 50 meg rear camera, a big old 5000 mAh battery, and it's powered by MediaTek's capable Dimensity 930. You can grab it here in Byyyyeeeee for £270, but is it worth that money? Well, let's whip the Moto G73 on out of its box, take you on a full-on tour, and for more on the latest and greatest tech, please do subscribe and ding that notifications bell, and I'll get to you bloody lot another time. So first up, what do you actually get in the box? Well, you've got yourself one Moto G73 smartphone, which is actually pre-ensconced in a condom case. Good bit of extra protection there. You've also got yourself the old 3-pin adapter and a USB Type-C charging cable. And that's it, nice and easy, so let's crack on. So as you may expect at this sort of budgety price point, the Moto G73 sports a simple plastic design. Looks like dozens of previous Motorola budget blowers, fairly smart and simple. Got that classic Moto logo slapped there on back, of course. The bezels surrounding that mighty 6.5-inch screen aren't horrendously thick or anything. You do have a little bit of lip action, but it's nothing compared with some of the smartphones of yesteryear. It'll be big enough to have the actual name of the phone underneath. And overall, the Moto G73 feels fairly comfortable to clutch thanks to the fact it isn't absolutely wanging massive, and you've got the curved corners and reasonably curved edges. A portion of them is flat, but then they do slope away once you get around to that arse end. But yeah, that back end is very smooth, very little in the way of grip, and as you can see there, it does tend to mark up rather easily. Already looking pretty greasy and grimy there, so you'll have to buff it up occasionally. And here in Byyyyeeeee, when you order the Moto G73 direct from Motorola, your only colour choice is this here midnight blue option, suitably moody, pretty standard Motorola colour. Would have been nice to have some brighter colour options as well, but hey-ho, I guess it suits the general March mood. And also apparently the Moto G73 is water repellent, not water resistant, so definitely don't go taking it into the shower or anything, but if you spill your pint or your G&T on it, hopefully it won't splutter and die. Now if you've used a Motorola smartphone before, you'll know exactly what to expect from the software here on the Moto G73. It's a pleasingly stock version of Android. Motorola doesn't bugger around slapping launchers on top of Android, and the good news is it is the latest, freshest Android 13 as well. A wee word of warning though, perhaps do not expect long-lasting dedicated support from Motorola when it comes to the Moto G73's software. I'm talking the OS and security updates. That particular well tends to run dry after just a year or two. A situation that's certainly not helped by the fact that Motorola seems to spaff out a couple dozen new smartphones a year. But yeah, these Moto blowers are basically the smartphone equivalent of a Premiere In. You know exactly what you're going to get before you even turn the bugger on. Having said that, in addition to all the standard Google Android apps, you do have a couple of bonus bits chucked on here now, like good old reliable solitaire. You've randomly got a bit of Pinterest on there now as well. But thankfully you can tell these extra bits to bugger right off if you want to. And as always, Motorola's main addition remains the Moto app. I really like the latest incarnation of this. It looks very smart indeed. You're not scrolling down for ages either. It's a bit more concise, shall we say. And the Moto app basically just chucks a few bonus features on top of the standard Android fare. So for instance, you can quickly and easily personalize your smartphone. So for instance, we can change up the layout of the desktops, fit a few more icons in there. You can change up the wallpapers, the theme and colors. And while you don't have an always on display on the Moto G73, as it's not an OLED screen, you do have a peak display. That's something you can bring up with just a quick double tap if you need to check the time or notifications. And Motorola does offer up a decent selection of wallpapers itself, including some dynamic efforts. Another great reason to check out the Moto app is the excellent gesture support. This includes my particular favourite, the fast torch. This will be the first time I've done this in 2023. Let's see if I've still got it. Oh, it's going to come a day when my wrist can't handle that anymore. I ain't got plenty of other bits and pieces chucked away in there as well. The Moto Secure section, well worth a squint as well. You got fast access to all of Android's privacy controls and features like Secure Folder and that pin pad scramble. And from this menu, you can also set up the edge-mounted fingerprint sensor, which is built into this super skinny power button, but so far on the Moto G73 seems responsive and reliable. You've also got a couple of display features. You've got some tips and tricks, which basically shows off all of the major features of the Moto G73, especially good if you're new to Android 13 or Motorola phones in general. And then last up is the play section. This is where you'll find the media controls and the gaming mode lurking, but more on those later. So now the incredibly sexy subject of storage, woof, and the Moto G73 is absolutely stacked in this regard because you've got 256 gigs of space, and that's by default as well. That's more than the base iPhone and quite a few other flagships. And because it's stock Android, it's pretty light as far as system requirements go. As you can see, there's only 10 gigs of space used up. The bulk of what I'm using the storage for is good old Genshin Impact, of course. And an even better news as well, if you do happen to run out of storage or you're struggling for space, well, you can actually bung a microSD memory card into the Moto G73 to expand it up to a further terabyte. That will take up residence in your second SIM slot, however, so it's either one or the other. Now the Moto G73 sports a 6.5-inch LCD panel. There's no OLED tech here, unfortunately, unlike some of the rivals around this price like the OnePlus Nord CE. And that is a shame. I do really prefer OLED screens because you've got deeper blacks, you've got stronger contrast in general, you've got wider viewing angles. As you can see there, the image does darken quite considerably when you turn it ever so slightly away from your face. And those colours ain't quite as punchy or poppy either. All the same, it's not a bad screen by any means. It's perfectly fine for just kicking back with a bit of Disney Plus or Netflix or whatever, and it's fine for gaming too. Got a full HD plus resolution, so 2400 by 1080 pixels, visuals are reasonably crisp, and it does max out at 120Hz refresh too. And the Motorola Moto G73 also sports a stereo speaker setup, which I've got to say is surprisingly pretty bloody good.
Lear LoomPad 2 tablet. And this smarty pants device allows you to enjoy lots of glasses-free 3D content, from movies to games to follically challenged YouTube knobbers.
It's crazy loud, so no worries if you're trying to watch a video or listen to a podcast in a really noisy environment like a kitchen when you're busy cooking with kids singing and screeching in the background. And that earpiece speaker actually pumps out a decent bit of the audio itself. You're not entirely reliant on that bottom speaker, so there's a reasonable amount of balance. And yeah, things get a little bit tinny when you do bump the volume all the way up, but for this sort of price point, it's a decent audio output. And yes, if you jump back on into the Moto app, scroll to the bottom with those media controls, you'll see you do have Dolby Atmos support in here. That's set to smart mode by default, but you can completely customize the audio output as well if you want to. And as well as Bluetooth 5.3 support, you've also got an actual 3.5mm headphone jack, ruddy heck. So now let's have a shufty at the performance, and Motorola's Moto G73 is a bit of a curiosity in these stakes because it uses MediaTek's Dimensity 930 chipset backed here by 8 gigs of RAM. And that is a chipset that is used by next to no smartphones, basically the Moto G73 and a very obscure Vivo phone that hasn't even launched outside of China. Now the everyday performance so far has been absolutely fine. Occasionally an app will take a little while to load up and you'll see a little bit of juddering here and there as you are flipping between different apps. But the major pain point that I've noticed so far using the Moto G73 is the camera app. Sometimes you'll be swapping camera modes and it'll take a second or two to actually comply. And also, for instance, if you are deleting a photo, sometimes again this will take a good couple of seconds to actually process, and in the meantime you won't actually be able to do anything. Still, the benchmarking score is fairly respectable. Geekbench 6 spaffed out 915 for the single core score, 2299 for the multi. But of course the big test when it comes to performance is, can you actually do gaming on the thing? And the answer to that question is yes, kind of, I guess. More demanding fare like Genshin Impact certainly does struggle, even when you keep the graphics settings low. And even if you jump on into the Motorola G73's dedicated gaming mode as well and boost the performance all the way up there, I still found that the frame rate was very shaky indeed. The game was certainly playable, but it wasn't by any means a smooth, fluid experience. But thankfully when I swapped over to Call of Duty Mobile, the Moto G73 was a lot happier. I wasn't able to chuck up the game to the highest detail settings, that option was not available, but thankfully even on the medium settings I got a beautiful frame rate, nice smooth fluid gameplay. And that flat display is perfectly responsive as well, so certainly good for your competitive online shooty shenanigans. And Motorola's dedicated gaming mode also allows you to block notifications and calls and fiddle with some other settings as well. Make sure you're fully immersed in your multiplayer murdathon. I did find the back end of the Moto G73 got slightly warm after you've been gaming for about half an hour or so, but it didn't get any worse than that and it certainly didn't impact the performance. And oh yes, 5G support. You've got full 5G connectivity here on the Moto G73, as you could probably tell by the fact that it's called the Moto G73 5G. Can we please stop putting 5G after the name of every bloody smartphone, please? 5G's been a thing for what, 2 years, 3 years now? I mean, basically, if it doesn't have 5G, then it sucks. Now, Motorola has once again crammed a mighty 5000 mAh capacity battery inside of the Moto G73, and the battery life so far has been absolutely superb. Not only do you have that enormous battery, but you've got the energy efficient Dimensity 930 chipset. You've also got that stock Android experience as well, so you don't have little features and tools draining away the battery in the background. And long story short, you'll easily get a day of play out of this thing, even with loads and loads of screen on time, and if you're a bit more conservative, you should be able to stretch it to 2 full days between charges. And then when the Moto G73 is fully drained and in need of a recharge, where you've got a bit of Motorola's Turbo Power 30 tech on board, so it's 30-watt charger, not exactly the nippiest around, but certainly good enough to get it mostly powered back up again in an hour. Which brings us nearly onto the final bit of the Motorola Moto G73, the camera tech. You've got yourself a 50 megapixel primary camera sensor here, although no optical image stabilization. The focus seems fairly fast to act. I believe it's the usual phase detection autofocus. As I mentioned before, however, the app can be a little bit unresponsive. That shutter speed isn't fantastic either. If you keep on tapping the button, as you can see there, you're only getting a photo every other time. But besides its general lethargy, I do rather like Motorola's camera app. For instance, you can quickly and easily pull down all of the various toggles with a single hand. And you also get these helpful little suggestions popping up. So for instance, whenever a face is detected, it says, hey, maybe switch to portrait mode. And as always with Motorola blows, you've got several camera modes to choose from, including a full-on dedicated pro mode with RAW support. Portrait mode, you've got night vision, which is activated by default as well when conditions are crap. You can also shoot photos at the full 50 megapixels if you want. You've got like some Motorola spot color, all the classic stuff. And here's just a small selection of test photos that I shot with the Moto G73 over the course of a couple of days. No real surprises here, detail levels are good as long as the lighting is fine, otherwise in lower light conditions you start to get a lot of noise and grain. If you want to shoot a bit of home movie action, well, when you swap to the video mode, you'll notice there's no way of changing the resolution, it just shoots in full HD at either 30 or 60 frames per second. And again, my video came out fine as long as, again, I was shooting in decent light, and at night time, basically, I wouldn't bother. But the stabilization's actually okay, and the audio pickup nice and clear. And as well as that 50 megapixel primary sensor, you do have a basic 8 megapixel ultra wide angle shooter, very bog standard, simple stuff. And this can also be used for your macro shots if you're into all of that. And of course, not forgetting your own glorious mug, which you can snap using the 16 megapixel front facing selfie cam. This allows you to swap between 2 very different viewpoints, as you can see there. Whoa! You've got the usual portrait shenanigans, and this seems to do a fairly decent job. Pretty standard stuff again at this sort of price point. And in low light, you do have a screen flash feature to help out a bit. And yeah, the resolution is once again capped at full HD, unsurprisingly, for that front-facing camera. It'll do the job for a bit of vlogging, Skyping, Zooming, whatever else, but you know, don't expect wonders. And that right there, in a tiny little nutshell, is Motorola's fresh new Moto G73 mid-range smartphone. As I say, a snifter under 300 quid here in Blighty. It's a shame that performance wasn't a little bit beefier and you don't get that OLED display that you do get on some rivals around this sort of price point. But apart from that, the Moto G73 seems like a dependable wee effort. You've got that lovely stock version of Android, of course, great battery life. So it'd be great to hear your thoughts down below. Please do poke, subscribe and ding that notifications bell for more on the latest and greatest tech, and have yourselves a ruddy wonderful rest of the week. Cheers!